Chapter 1. The Racial Question. To truly understand how African Americans have strived for equality, even by serving and sacrificing in the U.S. military, it's important to look back at the history of race in America. From the very beginning, race has been a fundamental and inseparable part of the American story. When European colonists first came to America, they formed an idea of who they were and what their mission was. They often saw themselves as bringing civilization, freedom, and democracy to a new land. This idea, often presented as a God-given purpose, became deeply ingrained in American identity. In the 1840s, the term manifest destiny was coined. This was the belief that the United States was divinely chosen to expand across the entire continent, spreading its ideals of freedom and civilization throughout the land. This concept fueled a sense of American exceptionalism, a belief that the U.S. was unique and had a moral right to expand, sometimes at the expense of others. When Europeans arrived in the late 1400s, they often viewed Native Americans as savages who needed to be tamed and who stood in the way of progress. However, there was also a contrasting, romanticized view. Some saw Native Americans as noble savages, people untouched by the corruption of European society, living in a state of natural purity. The colonists saw themselves as overcoming the vices and corruption of Europe, starting fresh, a new man. The story of America as a place of rebirth and a refuge for those seeking freedom began with the arrival of the Pilgrims in 1620. This idea of America as a haven for the oppressed became a powerful myth. Starting in 1630, the Puritan immigration established the colony of Massachusetts. John Winthrop, a key figure in Puritan England, envisioned America as a city on a hill, a model civilization for the rest of the world. This feeling of being exceptional arose from the complicated nature of colonization. England's internal conflicts, as well as its religious and political struggles, were reflected in the colonies. Unlike colonies established by other European powers, most of the North American colonies weren't primarily established for resource exploitation. Instead, they were populated for economic, religious, or political reasons, acting as a release valve for tensions within England. Many poor people in England were forced to leave their land and move to cities. However, they were often seen as criminals, vagrants, and a burden on society. Emigration to the New World offered an opportunity for a fresh start, despite the risks involved. Unlike the Spanish Empire, which had strong central control, the English colonies were more independent. Each colony had its government and a high degree of self-rule. The colonies in England had a complex relationship, marked by both conflict and imitation. The colonies maintained English culture and political institutions. They were bound by loyalty to the king and followed legal traditions based on English law. However, the colonies were often founded by people who disagreed with or were forced out of England, resulting in societies that were often significantly different from the mother country. All of these factors led to a strong desire for prominence and independence among the colonists, which would shape American history. The American dream, the idea that anyone can achieve success through hard work, has its roots in the very beginning of the United States. While American history is founded on the idea of freedom, it also has a long history of domination and oppression. The very founding of the nation laid the groundwork for how America would grapple with slavery and, later, racial issues. The freedom sought by the first colonists was inextricably linked to the reality of slavery. Beginning in the late 1500s, the Crown began to rely on private individuals for slave trading, establishing the Atlantic slave trade as a key part of the transatlantic economy. In 1619, the first enslaved Africans arrived in Virginia to be used as labor on plantations. In 1661, the Barbados Slave Codes, laws outlining the specifics of slavery, were created. These codes defined enslaved people as property, stripping them of their humanity and allowing them to be bought and sold. This marked the beginning of a painful history, marked by suffering, yet also a history of resilience and the fight for freedom. The American Revolution, alongside the French Revolution, marked a pivotal moment in the evolution of Western political modernity. Following the conclusion of the 7 Years' War, Britain found itself grappling with a staggering public debt, compelling the government to reconsider its approach to managing the colonial empire. This financial strain began to fracture the relationship between the colonies and the British Crown, setting the stage for a burgeoning desire for independence. Initially, the movement towards independence did not emerge as a distinctly anti-colonial effort. However, as the gap widened between the colonists' aspirations and the Crown's intentions, the revolutionary sentiment grew. By 1765, the term America began to be used collectively to refer to the 13 colonies, and patriotic movements, such as the Sons and Daughters of Liberty, started advocating for freedom, rallying around the principle of no taxation without representation. While the military involvement of African Americans during the Revolutionary War was relatively minor, the period from 1775 to 1783 catalyzed the notion that conscription could serve as a means of racial integration and rehabilitation for enslaved African Americans. Both British and American forces sought to enlist enslaved people, offering freedom in exchange for military service. The British were the first to formally extend such an offer, with Lord Dunmore, the governor of British Virginia, issuing a proclamation in 1775 that promised freedom to any enslaved individual willing to fight for the British Army. This proclamation led to a significant number of enslaved individuals seeking refuge with British forces, as they viewed it as a potential path to freedom. Conversely, many African Americans chose to fight alongside the colonists, motivated by the promise of emancipation and the opportunity to defend national freedom. Throughout the war, enlistment was often accompanied by assurances of freedom, although the reality after the war was starkly different. By the end of the Revolutionary War, while slavery had been abolished in most northern states, it remained entrenched in the Southern economy, with true emancipation for African Americans only coming decades later, during the American Civil War and the subsequent enactment of the 13th Amendment. The Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, foundational documents of American democracy, revealed the inherent contradictions within the nation's values. The principles of freedom espoused in these texts stood in stark contrast to the continued existence of slavery. Thomas Jefferson, a vocal opponent of slavery, initially included a clause in the draft of the Declaration that condemned the king's role in perpetuating the slave trade. However, this clause was removed due to pushback from Southern colonies, leading Congress to implicitly acknowledge the legitimacy of slavery and the exclusion of African Americans from the rights articulated in the Declaration. The revolutionary character of these documents was evident in their establishment of a sovereign state based on new principles that define the relationship between the government and the governed. While the ideals expressed in the Declaration resonated universally, they were not equally applied, as the rights it proclaimed were primarily reserved for white male settlers. Frederick Douglass, a former slave and a prominent figure in the African American movement, famously articulated this discrepancy in his July 4, 1852, speech. He highlighted the disconnection between the values of equality and freedom celebrated on Independence Day and the lived experiences of African Americans, who remained marginalized and oppressed. The Declaration proclaimed, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." Yet this assertion was fundamentally flawed. The rights enshrined in the document were not extended to women or African Americans, who were systematically excluded from civil, political, and social rights. At this juncture in history, the racial divide had not yet solidified, and separate military regiments had not yet emerged. The contributions of African Americans during the Revolutionary War were acknowledged, albeit begrudgingly, with figures like William Wells Brown, an abolitionist and former slave, noting in his 1867 work, The Negro in the American Rebellion, that African Americans had fought valiantly for the American cause. He pointed out that both the Federal Convention and the state conventions recognized the bravery of black soldiers in their fight against British oppression. The account you provided highlights the significant roles played by African Americans in early American history, particularly during moments leading up to the Revolution. Crispus Attucks is often recognized as the first casualty of the Boston Massacre and is a figure of substantial historical importance. Reliable sources suggest that he was of mixed descent, with an African father and a Native American mother from Massachusetts. His legacy grew during the anti-slavery movement, symbolizing the bravery and commitment of African Americans to the cause of freedom. The background context reveals the impact of the Townshend Acts, enacted by the British Parliament to increase control over the colonies. This led to heightened tensions and the deployment of British troops in Boston. On March 5, 1770, confrontations broke out on King Street, sparked by an incident involving an attack on a barber's apprentice. The intervention of British soldiers escalated the situation, resulting in the deaths of 5 civilians, including Crispus Attucks. The immediate aftermath was met with widespread public outrage. A town meeting was convened, drawing an immense crowd, and the bells of Boston rang out in mourning. 3 days later, a public funeral was held for the victims, which closed shops and attracted the largest assembly on the continent for such an occasion. Another notable figure, Peter Salem, is credited with killing British officer John Pitcairn during the Battle of Bunker Hill in June 1775. His actions further exemplified the contributions of African Americans in the fight for independence. These events not only highlight the contributions of figures like Crispus Attucks and Peter Salem in revolutionary contexts but also reflect the broader struggle for freedom and equality that would continue to shape American history. Their actions and sacrifices remind us of the diverse influences that contributed to the fight for independence. Chapter 2. The Civil War. The Southern ideology viewed slavery as essential for cultivating a vibrant and dynamic civil society, akin to that of the North. Cotton, often referred to as white gold, was seen as a crucial resource for enhancing profits through exports, acting as an engine for development that paralleled the Unionist growth. The slave system was perceived as the foundation for productivity within this economy, serving as a means to uphold the white social order. This hierarchical and repressive organization was contrasted with Northern nationalism, which championed the concept of free labor. The issue of slavery intensified with the westward expansion, raising tensions between the North and the South concerning slavery in new states. Southern elites worried that the spread of free labor ideals would lead to a proliferation of abolitionist states, risking constitutional amendments that could dismantle slavery nationwide. While the conflict primarily stemmed from economic, the North's industrialism versus the South's plantation capitalism, and political, the relationship between federal and state governance factors, anti-slavery advocates argued that slavery was an outdated practice incompatible with the democratic evolution of America and morally contradictory to its stated values. Philanthropic groups promoted escape through the Underground Railroad. At the same time, the abolitionist movement worked to expose the realities of the plantation system to Northerners. During this period, the abolitionist movement was still in its early stages of development. Opposition to slavery did not automatically equate to an acknowledgement of equality between black and white individuals. Conversely, Southern supporters argued for the protection of property rights, noting that the Fifth Amendment prohibited the restriction of property without due process of law or without just compensation. They also upheld the principle of popular sovereignty, asserting that new states should decide for themselves whether to allow slavery. In 1857, the Supreme Court's Dred Scott v. Sanford ruling bolstered Southern arguments by declaring that African American slaves were not legally recognized as citizens but as property, lacking the right to sue in court, and stating that Congress could not legislate over individual territories. Tensions escalated following Abraham Lincoln's election to the presidency. Although Lincoln did not explicitly call for the abolition of slavery in existing states, he was committed to preventing its spread into newly acquired Western territories. The day after his election, South Carolina's legislature convened a special convention to approve secession from the Union, which was accepted on December 20th. By early January, 6 additional states had joined South Carolina. On February 4th, the Confederate States of America were established with a new constitution and Jefferson Davis as its president. For the South, the war was deemed necessary, fought in defense of a constitutionally protected right to secede, with claims that they were fighting for their independence. Meanwhile, the North argued for national unity, positing that the Union guaranteed prosperity, development, and security. The dissolution of the Union threatened the ideals of freedom and democracy that underpinned the nation's foundation. Ultimately, the Confederacy posed a significant threat to Northern industries, as it favored trade relationships with Great Britain and controlled strategic ports, which could potentially allow it to monopolize trade and hinder Northern entrepreneurs and merchants. Lincoln's primary goal during the Civil War was to preserve the Union and prevent states from seceding, rather than solely abolishing slavery. He aimed to maintain support from slaveholding states loyal to the Union. The Emancipation Proclamation, effective January 1, 1863, declared freedom for slaves in areas under Union control. However, its authority was questioned, as it did not apply to regions outside Union jurisdiction. However, the Union forces had the strength to enforce their policies in the occupied South. Following the proclamation, free blacks in the North began to join the military, and enslaved people in the South also started fighting back. The Union began officially recruiting African Americans, leading to the creation of the United States Colored Troops with General Order 143 on May 22, 1863. Massachusetts Governor John Andrew responded by forming the 54th Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry Regiment, which fought bravely in the assault on Fort Wagner on July 18, 1863. If captured, Fort Wagner could have allowed the United States to bombard Fort Sumter, a crucial point for reaching Charleston, viewed as the birthplace of the Civil War. For the South, South Carolina and Fort Sumter represented the beginning of Confederate independence. At the same time, for the North, Charleston symbolized secession. The Union aimed to force the city to surrender and weaken the Confederacy. Although the attack failed, resulting in heavy casualties for African American soldiers, their bravery changed many Northern opinions on black soldiers serving in the Union Army. Battles like Fort Wagner showcased their courage and military skills. Frederick Douglass played a pivotal role in recruiting for the regiment, encouraging African American men to enlist as a means to secure citizenship rights. His sons, Charles and Lewis Douglass, served in the 54th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment. By spring 1864, African American soldiers became pivotal in Virginia operations under General Ulysses Grant, fighting in the significant Battle of Petersburg, which was critical for Confederate supply lines. Grant took 9.5 months to capture Petersburg, employing multiple offensives until General Lee's forces were unable to hold back the Federals. The Battle of Petersburg was a pivotal event in the outcome of the American Civil War. During the Siege of Petersburg, African American soldiers displayed great bravery at the Battle of New Market Heights, September 29 to 30, 1864, and received the Medal of Honor. On April 9, 1865, General Lee surrendered to General Grant, marking the South's defeat and the end of its economic system, paving the way for Northern industrial capitalism. The Civil War also led to the enlistment of African Americans in the regular army in 1866, resulting in the establishment of 4 infantry and 2 cavalry regiments. In 1869, these regiments were reorganized, leading to the famous Buffalo Soldiers. The Civil War marked a significant turning point, culminating in the passage of the 13th Amendment in January 1865, which abolished slavery in the United States. However, the end of the war also led to a persistent social divide and the beginning of widespread discrimination, hatred, and extremism. This period ushered in racial segregation under the principle of separate but equal, transforming discrimination into a more hidden and violent form. Before the Civil War, Southern racism was unjust. Still, it did not always involve hatred toward African Americans, who were viewed as property rather than individuals. The society believed that slavery was beneficial for black people, whom they viewed as incapable of reaching civilization on their own. Southern plantation owners argued that slavery helped elevate African Americans from their supposed intellectual weaknesses. In contrast, Southern discourse often expressed fear of potential rebellions due to the black majority in Southern states. After the Civil War, violent hatred intensified. Efforts to build a multiracial democracy quickly failed, leading to the restoration of the old racial order in the South and the enactment of black codes to limit the freedoms of former slaves. After the Civil War, two primary laws were enacted to implement rights for free blacks: the Freedmen's Bureau and the Civil Rights Act. The Freedmen's Bureau was the first federal agency within the War Department, established to assist in the social integration of formerly enslaved African Americans. The Civil Rights Act declared that all U.S. citizens, regardless of race or previous status, were entitled to equal citizenship. Although both laws were passed, they were vetoed by President Andrew Johnson, who, despite being anti-slavery, did not believe in equal rights for blacks and whites. To take advantage of the support from African Americans, Congress created the Reconstruction Amendments, the 14th Amendment, 1868, which granted citizenship to blacks, and the 15th Amendment, 1870, which allowed them to vote. During Reconstruction, the Union Army occupied the South, dividing it into military districts to facilitate the creation of new constitutions that included these amendments. However, the occupation led to frustration in the South. It gave rise to extremist groups like the Ku Klux Klan, founded in 1866. Post-war, the conditions for freed blacks severely declined. Emancipation was a moral victory, but without jobs, training, or basic needs, it was also a socio-economic failure. During this period, northern states exerted military and political control over the South, with many African Americans achieving rights and being elected to offices. By 1870, the Democratic Party regained power in the South, led by the Redeemers. The political balance shifted back when Republican Hayes agreed to withdraw federal troops in 1876, leading to the enactment of Jim Crow laws that enforced racial segregation. In 1890, Louisiana passed a law mandating separate railroad carriages for whites and blacks. Homer Plessy, of mixed race, was arrested for sitting in a white's carriage. His case reached the Supreme Court, which upheld the legality of segregation, making it constitutional. New laws and strategies enabled the continued segregation in public services, including the military, after the passage of the Reconstruction Amendments. The United States Military Academy at West Point was established in 1802. Despite initial resistance, black officers were admitted due to pressure from the Republican War Department. However, the Academy did not graduate these black cadets and subjected them to psychological and physical abuse. From 1870 to 1898, only 22 black individuals were admitted, with only 3 graduating after enduring significant discrimination. Henry Ocean Flipper became the first African American to graduate from the United States Military Academy at West Point in 1877, sparking controversy and doubt about his accomplishments. Despite this, Flipper excelled in his exams and was awarded for his good character. He chose to remain in the U.S. Army instead of taking a command position in Liberia and later contributed to military projects and campaigns. Flipper's career faced challenges when he was falsely accused of embezzlement and subsequently forced out of the Army, despite being found innocent of the charges. His reputation remained tarnished for many years but was finally restored in 1976. West Point created the Henry O. Flipper Memorial Award in 1977, and he received military honors after his exhumation in 1978. In 1999, President Bill Clinton granted him a presidential pardon. John H. Alexander and Charles H. Young followed Flipper as the second and third African Americans to graduate from West Point, with Young achieving the rank of colonel during World War I. Chapter 3. Buffalo Soldiers. Westward expansion played a crucial role in 19th-century American foreign policy. It began in 1803 with the annexation of Louisiana. It continued throughout the century, until Native American resistance was largely overcome and U.S. territories were fully claimed. American institutions evolved as new territories were acquired. The population grew, often justifying violence against Native Americans as a means to civilize the West. In the Supreme Court case Cherokee v. Georgia, 1831-32, it was determined that Native American nations were domestic independent nations under federal protection, leading to the rejection of the Cherokees' claim for independence after the Indian Removal Act of 1830. In this era, the relationship between settlers and Native Americans shifted. Settlers, who were initially vulnerable, sought protection from the indigenous peoples, the lords of the land. The Monroe Doctrine, established by John Quincy Adams and presented by President James Monroe in 1823, formalized the justification for American expansionism not only within the U.S. but across the continent. It included three main principles: non-colonization, non-intervention, and the separation of spheres of influence. Additionally, African American soldiers made significant contributions to the U.S. Army on the western frontier from 1866 to 1891, protecting settlers and building infrastructure. From the end of the Civil War to the early 1890s, African American troops, known as Buffalo Soldiers, comprised approximately 20% of the U.S. Army forces active in the American West. 1 in 5 soldiers who helped conquer the frontier was black. For many African Americans, joining the Army meant escaping poverty, segregation, and farm labor. With a steady salary, meals, and the hope for equality, enlistment represented a path toward dignity and change. Despite harsh conditions, segregation, discrimination from white officers and civilians, poor supplies, and frequent isolation, these troops persevered. They were often stationed in remote forts across Kansas, Texas, the Dakotas, and the Southwest, far from white communities. Their presence often stirred racial tensions, especially in Texas, where clashes with civilians and white soldiers were common. Nevertheless, black troops distinguished themselves through courage and discipline. They served longer, deserted less, and re-enlisted more than white troops. Their combat performance earned them 18 Medals of Honor between 1866 and 1891. In time, even many white soldiers and officers grew to respect them. The name Buffalo Soldiers is believed to have come from Native American tribes who saw a resemblance between the soldier's hair and the fur of the buffalo. It symbolized both toughness and respect. Despite facing racism and hardship, Buffalo Soldiers became some of the most effective and reliable troops in the U.S. Army during the Indian Wars, making significant contributions to military campaigns in the Great Plains and beyond. After proving their courage in battle, African American troops, especially the 10th Cavalry, earned deep respect from Native Americans, who nicknamed them Buffalo Soldiers. The term, referencing the sacred buffalo, was meant as a tribute to their strength and bravery. Black soldiers embraced the name with pride, and it eventually came to represent all black military units. The buffalo later became a key symbol in their regimental crest and identity, carried into future wars. In 1867, the same year the 10th Cavalry arrived in Kansas, Congress established the Medicine Lodge Peace Commission, aiming to relocate Native American tribes onto reservations and prevent further conflict. However, peace didn't last. Violations of treaties by white settlers, such as burning a Cheyenne and Sioux village, led to renewed violence. In turn, Native retaliations were met with harsh military responses. Buffalo Soldiers, including the 9th and 10th Cavalry regiments, played a central role in these conflicts. They fought in areas from Kansas and Oklahoma to Texas, Arizona, and New Mexico, battling tribes like the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Kiowa, and Comanche. At the same time, they protected vital infrastructure, such as mail routes, and restored order along the Texas-Mexico border. In 1870, Sergeant Emmanuel Stantz of the 9th Cavalry became the first African-American soldier to be awarded the Medal of Honor during the Indian Wars, for his bravery in Texas. Meanwhile, prominent figures like General Custer, who had refused to lead black troops, faced devastating defeats, such as his infamous death at Little Bighorn in 1876. In the years following, this battle was mythologized in American culture. By 1887, Buffalo Bill's Wild West show had transformed the frontier into entertainment, glorifying the white cowboy while overshadowing the complex stories of black soldiers, Native American resistance, and the harsh realities of the frontier. Despite their major contributions, Buffalo Soldiers were largely erased from the popular narrative of the American West. Hollywood and mainstream history painted the expansion as a triumph of white pioneers, ignoring not only black soldiers but also immigrants who helped build the railroads and infrastructure of the frontier. After the Battle of Little Bighorn, Native resistance declined. The Indian Wars shifted to campaigns of confinement on reservations, enforced through brutal military actions. One of the most grueling conflicts for black troops was the Victoria War, 1879 to 1880. Victorio, an Apache leader, resisted relocation to a harsh desert reservation. The U.S. Army, including the Buffalo Soldiers, relentlessly pursued him across New Mexico and into northern Mexico. His death in 1881 marked the end of a major chapter in Apache resistance. Two Buffalo Soldiers, Sergeants George Jordan and Thomas Shaw, were awarded the Medal of Honor for their bravery. The 10th Cavalry later fought in the Geronimo Campaign in Arizona, 1885 to 1886, helping to bring another powerful Apache leader to surrender. Meanwhile, Congress passed the Dawes Act in 1887, which dismantled tribal lands and imposed private property ownership on Native Americans under the guise of promoting integration. In reality, it stripped Native people of their culture and land. The Indian Wars effectively ended in 1890 with the massacre at Wounded Knee, where U.S. troops killed hundreds of Sioux, many unarmed. This marked the symbolic close of the Wild West era. Though the frontier faded, the Buffalo Soldiers continued to serve. They fought in the Spanish-American War, 1898, and the Philippine-American War, 1899 to 1902, extending their legacy of courage into U.S. overseas conflicts. Their role was grounded in the era's imperialist ambitions, justified in part by the Monroe Doctrine, which asserted American dominance in the Western Hemisphere and opposed European interference. Despite systemic racism and deliberate historical exclusion, the Buffalo Soldiers proved to be among the most disciplined and heroic units in U.S. military history, fighters not only of wars, but of injustice itself. In 1898, the U.S. entered the Spanish-American War, driven by strategic interests in Cuba and sympathy for Cuban independence, led by revolutionary José Martí. When the battleship USS Maine exploded mysteriously in Havana's harbor, a sensationalist yellow press stoked public outrage, pushing President William McKinley to order a blockade and prepare for war. The war marked a brief but significant moment for black soldiers. The 25th Infantry Regiment, comprising African American troops, was the first U.S. unit sent to Tampa, Florida. Soon, for more black volunteer regiments, the 7th through 10th, were formed, mostly led by white officers. For many black Americans, the war resonated ideologically. Cuba, seen as a colored country, had its black hero, Antonio Maceo, the Afro-Cuban general revered as a martyr. For them, helping liberate Cuba was a shared struggle against oppression. The war also produced one of the most integrated military efforts since the American Revolution. Buffalo Soldiers fought in key battles, including Las Guasimas, where the 10th Cavalry rescued the famed Rough Riders, a unit led by future President Theodore Roosevelt. They also fought at El Caney in the pivotal Battle of San Juan Hill, where the 9th and 10th Cavalry fought side by side with white and Cuban troops. Despite promises of loyalty, Roosevelt soon distanced himself from the Buffalo Soldiers. After the war's swift victory, lasting just 113 days, the U.S. forced Spain to sign the Treaty of Paris, gaining control of Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines for $25 million and securing Cuba's independence. Yet, despite their heroism, black volunteer regiments were disbanded, and their officers stripped of rank. Between 1899 and 1948, fewer than 10 black men were promoted to officer ranks in the U.S. Army. Race again shaped U.S. policy after the war. Although some Cuban nationalists hoped for U.S. annexation, Congress rejected the idea, fearing the racial makeup of a mixed Cuban population. The Teller Amendment, passed before the war even ended, declared that Cuba would be allowed to govern itself, preventing annexation in the name of racial and political concerns. After the Spanish-American War, U.S. relations with newly liberated territories grew more complicated. In 1901, the Platt Amendment was added to the Cuban Constitution, granting the U.S. the right to intervene in Cuban affairs and thereby limiting genuine Cuban independence. Meanwhile, in the Philippines, things escalated. Filipino independence leader Emilio Aguinaldo, who had fought against Spanish rule, now resisted U.S. occupation. The Filipino insurrectos established a government and prepared for war, believing the U.S. would allow them the same freedom Cuba was promised. In response, the U.S. created two new black regiments, the 48th and 49th Volunteer Infantry, to join the Buffalo Soldiers and fight in the Philippine-American War, 1899 to 1902. However, this sparked deep controversy among African Americans. Many questioned why black troops were being asked to suppress another non-white population's fight for freedom, especially when they were still facing racism and segregation in their own country. For them, it was a painful paradox, helping to deny others the liberty they were still fighting for at home. The war lasted 3 years and raised a deeper issue: could the U.S. expand its power without becoming an empire? Leaders like McKinley and Roosevelt claimed the U.S. wasn't conquering but civilizing, a justification that echoed in popular media and literature of the time. Most famously, Rudyard Kipling's poem The White Man's Burden became a sort of imperialist manifesto, suggesting it was the U.S.'s duty to uplift lesser peoples. But behind the rhetoric of civilization was a stark reality: freedom, rights, and citizenship in the American vision remained tightly bound to whiteness. The voices and struggles of the Filipinos, like those of Black Americans, were pushed aside in favor of a national myth of moral expansion. Chapter 4. The First World War. The 1916 election campaign revolved around President Woodrow Wilson's success in maintaining U.S. neutrality during World War I, particularly in the wake of Germany's submarine warfare against neutral ships. The U.S. shift from neutrality to engagement was prompted by the resumption of German submarine attacks and the interception of the Zimmermann telegram, which proposed a German-Mexican alliance against the U.S. In a pivotal speech on April 2, 1917, Wilson called for war, arguing that the United States had a moral obligation to defend democracy and human rights against autocratic threats. Wilson's vision extended beyond mere national interests as he sought to frame U.S. involvement in the conflict as a defense of universal values, aiming to position the United States as a champion of order against imperialism. Despite this rhetoric, the U.S. still struggled with systemic domestic injustices, particularly against African American citizens. This excerpt examines the social and political landscape in the United States during World War I, highlighting the significant role of both women and African Americans in the fight for civil rights and recognition. It details how President Woodrow Wilson endorsed the racist film The Birth of a Nation, which advocated for white supremacy and the KKK. The narrative shifts to moments of progress, such as Jeannette Rankin becoming the first woman elected to Congress and her subsequent vote against war. During the war, American women campaigned for voting rights, culminating in the ratification of the 19th Amendment. Additionally, it points out the racial discrimination faced by black soldiers, who, despite their long history of service, were excluded from most military roles and forced into support positions. The War Department reorganized the U.S. Army during World War I, creating two new black combat units, the 92nd and 93rd Infantry Divisions. The 92nd Division was primarily composed of recruits and some existing African American soldiers. In contrast, the 93rd Division included the renowned Harlem Hellfighters and other regiments. Due to racial tensions, many white American soldiers were unwilling to serve alongside black troops, leading to the decision to assign the 93rd Division to the French Army. General John J. Pershing ceded control of the 93rd Division to the French, who provided them with equipment. At the same time, the soldiers retained their U.S. uniforms. Pershing issued a directive to the French Army, cautioning them against being overly familiar or complimentary towards the black troops, emphasizing the racial prejudices prevalent in the United States. He warned that American attitudes towards race were rigid and that any perceived equality or familiarity could provoke backlash from white Americans. Pershing highlighted the significant racial divide in the U.S., where Black Americans were viewed as inferior and interactions were limited to professional contexts. He advised French officers to maintain a clear distinction in their treatment of Black American soldiers to avoid offending white American sentiments. The directive underscored the complexities of race relations during the war and the challenges faced by Black soldiers in a segregated military environment. The war in America exacerbated ethnic conflicts, particularly against the Black population and other groups perceived as contesting the war effort. This environment fostered a xenophobic patriotism, exemplified by the American Protective League, which engaged in espionage and created a culture of suspicion towards anything deemed anti-American, including female pacifism. Any dissent against the war was labeled as treasonous. President Wilson's 14-point speech aimed to reform the international system with clear rules and transparent agreements, leading to the proposal for the League of Nations. This organization was intended to consolidate democratic power, particularly that of the USA, and promote the principle of self-determination for peoples. However, Wilson's vision was not entirely idealistic. He believed that colonialism was a fundamental aspect of international relations and that not all peoples were capable of self-governance. Wilson faced significant opposition in the Senate, particularly regarding Article 10 of the League's statute, which would have ceded American sovereignty to an international body for military intervention. His presidency marked a time of political experimentation and social transformation. Yet, the progressivism he championed internationally was less evident within American society, where racial hierarchies persisted. The African American community found the notion of the United States as a bastion of equality and freedom to be absurd, especially in light of the racial violence that erupted during the Great War. The migration of Blacks to industrial cities in search of better opportunities led to riots, such as the East St. Louis riot in June 1917, which resulted in the deaths of 40 Black individuals. Post-war America remained deeply divided and segregated, as evidenced by the refusal of the Wilson administration to allow Black soldiers from the 92nd and 93rd Divisions to participate in victory parades alongside white soldiers, despite their bravery and recognition by the French military. The return of the 369th Regiment to New York on February 17, 1919, was celebrated as a significant event in Black American history, marking the largest celebration since emancipation. However, this hero's welcome contrasted sharply with the experiences of many other Black soldiers who faced hostility and segregation upon their return to their communities. A 1925 Army War College report highlighted the pervasive racism and dehumanization of Black soldiers, depicting them as inferior and subservient, despite their commendable military service during World War I. The societal perception of Black men was further exemplified by the Tulsa Massacre in 1921, where a white mob attacked the African American community in Greenwood, fueled by false accusations against a Black teenager. This incident underscored the ongoing violence and discrimination faced by Black individuals, often justified by claims of protecting white women. The aftermath of the war catalyzed significant changes within the African American social structure, leading to increased activism and the emergence of civil rights movements. Riots in cities like Washington, D.C., and Chicago reflected the growing demand for recognition and equality, as Black veterans refused to return to their previous subordinate status. Organizations such as the NAACP and the UNIA emerged, representing different ideologies within the African American movement, with Du Bois' integrationist approach and Garvey's separatist vision. These developments laid the groundwork for future civil rights activism, with the war empowering African Americans to assert their rights and challenge systemic injustices. The determination to fight back against oppression marked a pivotal moment in the evolution of the African American struggle, setting the stage for the civil disobedience and Black nationalism that would characterize the mid-20th century. Chapter 5. The Tuskegee Airmen. On March 4, 1933, Franklin Delano Roosevelt won the presidential election, marking the beginning of a transformative era in American history. Concurrently, Adolf Hitler was consolidating power in Germany by enacting laws that restricted civil liberties. In response to the economic crisis, economist John Maynard Keynes proposed an alternative to Soviet planning in fascist regimes, which influenced Roosevelt's approach to governance. Roosevelt's New Deal, initiated during his presidency, aimed primarily at economic recovery from 1933 to 1935. This initiative emphasized state intervention without imposing top-down control, instead adopting a broker-state model. As the crisis eased, the Second New Deal emerged, focusing on more extensive economic and social reforms. In a notable fireside chat on July 4, 1933, Roosevelt reassured the public that his policies aligned with American political traditions, despite criticisms of deviating from the status quo. However, many African Americans remained skeptical about the New Deal's benefits due to ongoing racial prejudice. Grassroots movements among black workers sought better employment opportunities, leading to increased participation in labor unions that advocated for economic rights and social justice. This period also witnessed a significant political shift, as many African American voters transitioned from the Republican to the Democratic Party, engaging more actively in racial justice efforts. The New Deal facilitated a major political realignment, creating a new democratic coalition that included the middle class, immigrant working class, women, and African Americans. The establishment of the Federal Council of Negro Affairs, also known as the Black Cabinet, marked a historic moment as black individuals gained a voice in the administration, largely due to the advocacy of Eleanor Roosevelt. In the 1934 elections, the Democratic Party achieved victories in traditionally Republican states, signaling the end of the 1896 system and establishing competitiveness in those regions. However, this new coalition presented challenges for Roosevelt, as he had to navigate a complex party landscape that included both a racist, segregationist South and a reformist North. Consequently, Roosevelt's stance on racial issues often sent mixed messages, as he refrained from supporting anti-lynching legislation to maintain Southern Democratic support, despite Eleanor Roosevelt's commitment to civil rights. The Scottsboro Boys incident in 1931 highlighted the severe racial injustices in America, where 9 African American boys were falsely accused and lynched, underscoring the brutal realities of the Jim Crow era. Billie Holiday's song Strange Fruit became a powerful symbol of this tragedy, using the metaphor of strange fruit to represent the bodies of black victims hanging from trees. The economic turmoil of the Great Depression intensified social conflicts, with President Franklin D. Roosevelt's initial policies addressing some economic issues but failing to consider the plight of the forgotten man, a term he used to describe those overlooked during the crisis. War veterans, denied promised bonuses due to the economic downturn, expressed their frustrations through protests, contrasting Roosevelt's empathetic approach with the violent tactics of his predecessor, Herbert Hoover. The 1930s witnessed the rise of populist movements led by figures such as Huey Long and Father Coughlin, who advocated for economic reforms, including income redistribution and social welfare programs, including pensions. The formation of the Committee for Industrial Organization, CIO, in 1935 marked a significant shift in labor organization, focusing on industrial workers, including immigrants, and introducing new mobilization tactics, such as sit-ins and strikes. However, the Great Depression exacerbated racial segregation, with African Americans disproportionately affected by job losses. In 1938, the Fair Labor Standards Act aimed to establish minimum wage and regulate labor practices, but faced strong opposition from Southern Democrats who resisted equal treatment for black workers and feared economic migration to the North. This opposition began to align with Republican resistance, as seen in the establishment of the Commission on Un-American Activities, which targeted alleged communist influences among New Deal supporters. Despite their capabilities, African Americans were systematically excluded from advanced roles in civil and military aviation, with no black pilots in the U.S. military at the time due to pervasive racial biases. Nevertheless, the desire among black individuals to serve their country as pilots remained strong, reflecting the cultural significance of aviation heroes in American society during that era. The entry of the United States into World War II highlighted the dual struggle faced by African Americans, who were tasked with fighting fascism abroad while simultaneously confronting racism at home. This contradiction underscored the flawed perceptions of their supposed inferiority. In 1944, economist Gunnar Myrdal emphasized in his study, An American Dilemma, that the American ideals of freedom and democracy were at odds with the realities experienced by African Americans, suggesting that resolving racial issues was essential for the integrity of the American creed. Many African Americans saw participation in the war as a potential solution to the long-standing color line problem identified by W.E.B. Du Bois. By 1940, the African American community had developed various protest strategies aimed at achieving full citizenship rights. This activism led to the establishment of aviation training programs, including a segregated Air Corps, driven by black politicians, civil rights organizations, and the African American press. On April 3, 1939, President Roosevelt, aided by Senator Henry H. Schwartz, enacted Public Law 18, which expanded the Army Air Corps and included provisions for training black pilots at historically black colleges. The Civilian Pilot Training Act, approved in the summer of 1939, aimed to train up to 20,000 civilian pilots annually, thereby creating a pool of pilots for the military. Initially, the program included 6 black colleges, with Tuskegee University emerging as a prominent training site. Tuskegee University, founded in 1881 through a political compromise, became integral to the Civil Aeronautics Authority's pilot training initiative, marking the beginning of the Tuskegee experiment. This initiative represented a significant step toward addressing racial inequalities in military aviation. It offered hope to African Americans seeking greater rights and recognition. The text discusses the historical context of racial segregation and the gradual integration of African Americans into the U.S. military during World War II, particularly through the Civilian Pilot Training Program at Tuskegee Army Airfield in Alabama. Initially, the program was segregated, reflecting the racist environment of the Jim Crow South, where there were no African American flyers in the armed forces as of 1940. In the political landscape of 1940, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt recognized the importance of the African American vote, which had been crucial in his previous elections. To avoid repeating past mistakes, he engaged with Republican leaders, including Wendell Willkie, who advocated for racial equality and published the influential book One World. This book called for freedom for all races and highlighted the need for the U.S. to address its internal racial issues to serve as a global model. Under pressure from civil rights activists and the media, Roosevelt's administration reversed its stance on racial integration in the military. On September 16, 1940, Congress passed a bill mandating the enlistment of black men in the armed services, leading to the establishment of training programs for African Americans in the Army Air Forces. The formation of the 99th Pursuit Squadron in January 1941 marked a significant milestone as the first all-black flying squadron. Roosevelt continued to support the African American community, notably by signing Executive Order 8802 in June 1941, which prohibited racial discrimination in war industries. However, this order did not eliminate segregation within the military. It inadvertently contributed to racial tensions and riots as it encouraged migration to northern cities. Overall, the text highlights the complex interplay of politics, civil rights, and military integration during a pivotal time in American history. The Tuskegee Institute's Aeronautical School captured the attention of First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, leading her to fly with Chief Civilian Flight Instructor Charles Alfred Anderson on March 29, 1941. This flight not only showcased her support for black pilots but also helped elevate the profile of the Institute and its training program through extensive media coverage. By July 1941, the Tuskegee Army Airfield, TAAF, was completed, funded in part by a $175,000 loan from the government, likely from Roosevelt. This facility was crucial for training the Tuskegee Airmen, with initial command held by white officers. However, as the war progressed, the 1st All-Black Air Unit was assigned black commanding officers, with Lieutenant George S. Roberts becoming the first black commander of the 99th Fighter Squadron in June 1942. Captain Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., the son of the first African-American general in the U.S. Army, was later appointed to lead the squadron in combat missions. The rigorous training and shared experiences fostered strong camaraderie among the Tuskegee pilots, who were determined to overcome racial prejudice. Their extensive flying time and superior training made them an elite group, as the War Department's recruitment system ensured that only the most capable African American candidates were selected for training. This focus on quality over quantity contributed to the squadron's success in the war. Chapter 6. The USA enters the war. During the pre-war period, the United States struggled with its role in European affairs, facing significant opposition from isolationist factions in Congress, particularly in the Senate. These isolationists, influenced by various groups including female pacifists and agricultural progressives, argued that the previous war was driven by the profit motives of war industries rather than a genuine need to maintain international order. Notably, the America First Committee, led by Charles Lindbergh, emerged as a prominent voice of isolationism. To maintain neutrality, Congress enacted the Neutrality Acts between 1935 and 1937, which restricted American involvement in foreign conflicts by prohibiting travel on warships, enforcing an arms embargo, and establishing a cash-and-carry system for non-military goods. The scope of these laws expanded to include the Spanish Civil War in 1937, highlighting the ineffectiveness of the League of Nations in maintaining global peace, particularly following events such as the Italian invasion of Ethiopia in 1935. President Roosevelt sought to shift public opinion with his quarantine speech in October 1937, arguing that the interconnectedness of nations made isolationism impractical. He warned that belligerence could spread like an epidemic, and neutrality would not ensure peace against the backdrop of rising threats from Germany and Japan. This perspective gained urgency as events unfolded in 1938, including the German annexation of Austria and the failed appeasement at the Munich Conference, which culminated in the violent Kristallnacht. These developments prompted Roosevelt to advocate for legislative measures to support democratic nations in Europe. By 1939, modifications to the cash-and-carry law permitted the sale of arms to France and Great Britain. In 1941, the Lend-Lease Act was introduced, facilitating the provision of military aid to countries deemed vital to the United States' defense, including the Soviet Union. This shift marked a significant transition in U.S. foreign policy from isolationism towards active support for allies against fascism. Following France's defeat and the signing of the Second Campaign Armistice in 1940, President Roosevelt warned that if enemies encircled the U.S., it would have to adopt a militarized state and a war economy. The 1940 elections led to Roosevelt's unprecedented third term, accepted due to the emergency context requiring stable leadership, despite internal Democratic Party opposition. The First Lady's brief speech emphasizing the need for leadership helped secure his nomination. To garner public support, Roosevelt emphasized America's role as a defender of democracy and a global leader. His Four Freedoms speech on January 6, 1941, expanded the definition of freedom to include social and economic rights, while redefining security to encompass social security beyond mere national defense. Historian Elizabeth Borgward notes that this discourse laid the groundwork for the Atlantic Charter, signed on August 10, 1941, which marked a shift from national agreements to a focus on individual human rights. The situation escalated dramatically after Japan attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. Japan, allied with Germany and Italy, had been pursuing expansionist policies in Asia, particularly against China. Roosevelt had previously imposed a blockade on steel and iron supplies to pressure Japan to withdraw from China. The surprise attack on Pearl Harbor resulted in significant U.S. casualties. It forced Congress to declare war on Japan, effectively ending the debate between isolationism and internationalism. However, pacifist Jeannette Rankin voted against the war. The collaboration between the federal government and film studios during World War II aimed to foster pro-war sentiment among the public. This partnership contributed to the economic recovery from the Great Depression, as the war effort absorbed unemployment and reinforced New Deal policies. The war also played a crucial role in promoting social inclusion, with women entering the workforce in war industries due to a shortage of male labor and immigrants finding opportunities through their participation in the war. However, African American soldiers faced delays in their combat assignments, particularly the 99th Fighter Squadron, which was not initially deployed. On February 19, 1942, the 100th Fighter Squadron, the second unit of black pilots, was activated at Tuskegee Army Airfield. By March 1942, the first class of African American pilots had completed advanced training, with only 5 graduates, including notable figures such as Captain Benjamin O. Davis Jr. and George S. Roberts. The 332nd Fighter Group, the first African American group in the Army Air Forces, was activated on October 13, 1942, at Tuskegee, comprising the 100th, 301st, and 302nd Fighter Squadrons. In 1944, the group expanded to include the 99th Pursuit Squadron, which was later renamed the 99th Fighter Squadron. This development marked a significant step in the integration of African Americans into the military aviation sector. In December 1942, Colonel Parrish took command of the school, promoting greater desegregation of facilities compared to his predecessors. He actively advocated for the deployment of the Tuskegee Airmen, gaining support from First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. His efforts culminated in the Combat Employment Order for the 99th Fighter Squadron on April 1, 1943, marking a significant moment for African Americans in the military and society, as they viewed the war as a fight for democracy and racial justice. The squadron, consisting of 287 men and 42 officers, arrived at Camp Shanks, New York, on April 4, 1943, before sailing to Casablanca, French Morocco, to serve the 12th Air Force. They were later relocated to an old Luftwaffe base in Oued-N'Dja, where they trained with Curtiss P-40 Warhawks. During this period, the Allies advanced in North Africa, culminating in the liberation of Tunisia on May 13, 1943, a significant strategic victory for the Allies. At the Casablanca Conference in January 1943, Allied leaders planned future operations in Italy following the closure of the African front. The 99th FS was integrated into these operations, participating in Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily, which began on July 9, 1943. Due to a shortage of black pilots, the 99th FS was assigned to work alongside white fighter groups, highlighting the ongoing challenges of integration within the military during this period. On May 29, 1943, the 99th Fighter Squadron, FS, was integrated into the 33rd Fighter Group, FG, under Colonel William Spike Mollmeyer, amidst a backdrop of racial tension and prejudice against the Tuskegee Airmen. The initial interactions were strained, with Mollmeyer displaying open hostility towards the squadron's leadership. The 99th FS commenced its combat operations on June 2, 1943, flying P-40 aircraft on patrol missions over the Mediterranean, primarily targeting ground installations and providing escort for bombers. By June 9, the squadron faced enemy aircraft for the first time during a mission over Pantelleria, where they encountered a larger German fighter force. Mollmeyer's criticism of the Tuskegee Airmen's combat effectiveness led him to propose ending their combat role. Still, General George C. Marshall intervened, prompting a review by the War Department's Advisory Committee on Negro Troop Policies. Davis, the squadron leader, successfully advocated for the squadron's continued participation in combat. Simultaneously, the 477th Bombardment Group was activated, although it faced challenges, including a lack of training facilities for black bomber pilots. On June 11, 1943, enemy forces surrendered at Pantelleria, facilitating the Allied invasion of Sicily, which the 99th FS supported. On July 2, The squadron achieved a significant milestone when pilot Charles B. Hall scored the first aerial victory by an African-American fighter pilot in the U.S. Armed Forces, downing an enemy aircraft. The 99th FS continued to play a vital role in escorting bombers during the campaign in Sicily, marking a pivotal moment in the history of African-American military aviation. On July 10, 1943, during the invasion of Sicily, the 99th Fighter Squadron played a crucial role in supporting Allied troops landing at Licata. The campaign concluded on August 17, 1943, marking a significant defeat for the fascist regime in Italy, which was already facing internal discontent due to a series of military failures. Following Mussolini's arrest on July 25, 1943, the new government under Marshal Pietro Badoglio was met with public jubilation, reflecting a widespread hope for an end to the war, although this was not immediately realized. On September 3, 1943, the Badoglio government signed an armistice with the Allies, effectively surrendering without future guarantees. This led to the king and government fleeing to Apulia under Allied protection. At the same time, German forces began occupying central and northern Italy. By autumn 1943, Italy was divided. The south remained under monarchical rule with Allied support, while the north was controlled by German forces and the Italian Social Republic, a new fascist state established by Mussolini. The 99th Fighter Squadron, although segregated, relocated to Molise on November 22, 1943, and subsequently to Capodichino Airfield near Naples on January 16, 1944. Shortly after, on January 22, Allied troops launched an amphibious attack at Anzio, where the squadron was tasked with air defense. On January 27 and 28, the squadron achieved notable success, with 11 pilots shooting down enemy fighters, contributing to a total of 32 enemy aircraft downed by 8 squadrons during the operation. Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., a former leader of the 99th Fighter Squadron, returned to the U.S. in October 1943 to command the 332nd Fighter Group, the first African-American fighter group. This group, which included the 99th Fighter Squadron by May 1, 1944, was deployed to the Mediterranean theater in February 1944, marking a significant moment in the integration of African-American units in the U.S. military. Members of the 99th Fighter Squadron were tasked with close air support and interdiction operations for the 12th Air Force. At the same time, the 332nd Fighter Group was assigned to escort heavy bombers from the 15th Air Force on missions targeting key enemy sites in Europe. By late May, they had transitioned to using P-47 Thunderbolt aircraft and relocated to Ramitelli Airfield in Italy. In late 1944, the 477th Bombardment Group reached a sufficient number of qualified personnel to begin combat training, moving to Freeman Field, Indiana, which offered better facilities than their previous base. A significant event occurred at Freeman Field regarding segregation, as the military attempted to open a second club for black officers, effectively maintaining segregation despite Army regulations mandating equal access to officer facilities. This discriminatory practice led the 477th Pilots to organize a nonviolent protest on April 5, 1945, attempting to enter the whites-only club. The protest resulted in the arrest of 61 black officers for disobeying orders. Following the incident, Colonel Selway issued a new order reinforcing segregation, which only 3 officers agreed to sign. At the same time, 101 refused and were subsequently transferred back to their old base under arrest. The NAACP intervened by contacting President Roosevelt, prompting General George Marshall to order the release of the 101 officers on April 19, recognizing the potential impact on morale among African American soldiers. In the aftermath, the leadership of the 477th Bombardment Group was changed to include black officers, with Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. appointed as commander. Although the 477th did not see combat during World War II, their actions at Freeman Field marked a pivotal moment in the struggle against military segregation. They highlighted the resilience of African American service members. Chapter 7. The Red Tails. The text highlights a significant moment in World War II history, focusing on the 332nd Fighter Group, which was the first all-black unit to engage in combat. After being integrated into the 332nd FG at Ramitelli in May 1944, the Black Squadrons, previously attached to white units, began their operations under the leadership of Colonel O. Davis Jr. The 99th Fighter Squadron joined the group on May 1 but remained with the 324th Fighter Group until July. Ramitelli served as a base for bomber escort missions, with Tuskegee pilots assigned to the 15th Air Force to protect B-17 and B-24 bombers over enemy territories. Following the Normandy landings on June 6, 1944, General Ira Eaker inquired about the readiness of the 332nd to escort bombers into Germany. Colonel Davis emphasized the importance of protecting the bombers, a strategy that became a hallmark of the group's success. The 332nd Fighter Group commenced its first mission with the 15th Air Force on June 7, 1944, escorting bombers to various European cities and conducting strafing missions. Notably, on June 25, they successfully strafed a German warship in Trieste Harbor, marking a significant achievement. Initially flying P-47 aircraft, the group transitioned to the P-51 Mustang in July, which offered greater speed and range but was more vulnerable to enemy fire. To distinguish their aircraft, the 332nd decided to paint the tails of their P-51s red, leading to their iconic nickname, the Red Tails. This decision not only made their planes recognizable to both allies and enemies but also solidified their legacy in aviation history. On July 6, 1944, the 99th Fighter Squadron arrived at Ramitelli Airfield, marking the full formation of the 332nd Fighter Group, which was unique in that it consisted of 4 squadrons due to the need for segregation among African American pilots. The group quickly demonstrated its capabilities, achieving significant aerial victories shortly after its formation. On July 16, they destroyed 2 Italian Macchi 205s, and the following day, they escorted B-24 Liberators on a mission that destroyed 3 German Mi-109s. July 18 proved to be their most successful day, with the group downing 2 FW-190s and 9 Mi-109s, contributing to a total of 39 aerial victories over 9 missions from July 12 to 30, 1944. As the summer progressed, the 332nd Fighter Group increasingly participated in escort missions for heavy bombers. By the end of August, following the start of Operation Overlord, the Allies had breached German defenses in northern France. Concurrently, Operation Dragoon, the Allied invasion of southern France, commenced on August 15, with the Red Tails flying 28 missions that resulted in the destruction of radar stations and 105 enemy aircraft on the ground. In September, despite adverse weather limiting their operations to 16 missions, the group managed to destroy 30 aircraft during a bombing raid on an airfield in Ilanza, Yugoslavia. A notable event occurred on September 10, 1944, when Brigadier General Benjamin O. Davis, Sr., presented the Distinguished Flying Cross to his son at Ramitelli, with several high-ranking military officials in attendance, highlighting the achievements and recognition of the 332nd Fighter Group. By 1945, the Axis powers were nearing defeat, with significant advances made by the Red Army and Anglo-American forces. The Red Army had successfully crossed Polish territory. It was moving towards Berlin, while the Anglo-Americans launched attacks across the Rhine, reaching the German capital by the end of March. The 332nd Fighter Group faced challenging weather conditions in January, limiting their operations to just 11 missions. However, February brought improved weather, allowing them to conduct 39 missions in 28 days. On March 6, the 302nd Fighter Squadron was disbanded, and the 332nd FG integrated the 99th, 100th, and 301st Squadrons, focusing their efforts on key targets within the Third Reich. A notable mission occurred on March 24, 1945, when the 15th Air Force undertook its longest mission to strike the Daimler-Benz tank assembly plant in Berlin. the 332nd FG was tasked with escorting B-17 bombers. Still, due to timing issues, they remained with the bombers longer than planned, risking their fuel reserves for the return journey. Despite facing the advanced German Me-262 jet fighters, the 332nd successfully utilized the agility of their P-51s, achieving the remarkable feat of shooting down 3 Me-262s, thanks to the efforts of 1st Lieutenant Roscoe Brown, 1st Lieutenant Earl Lane, and 2D Lieutenant Charles V. Brantley from the 100th Fighter Squadron. However, the mission was costly, and not all members of the 332nd Fighter Group returned safely. The missing air crew reports highlight the loss of 5 P-51 fighters from the 332nd Fighter Group, which included notable pilots such as Captain Armour G. McDaniel and flight officers James T. Mitchell, Jr., and Leon W. Spears. Despite these losses, the 332nd Fighter Group was awarded the Distinguished Unit Citation for its successful bomber escort missions, making it the only unit in World War II to receive such an honor. Meanwhile, the group's 99th Fighter Squadron received its third Distinguished Unit Citation for the same mission. On March 31, 1945, the 332nd Fighter Group executed a significant fighter sweep and strafing mission in southern Germany, destroying 13 enemy aircraft. The following day, they continued their success by downing another 12 enemy planes in Wels, Austria. Throughout April, the group participated in a total of 54 missions, achieving a total of 94 enemy aircraft shot down during the war. The 332nd Fighter Group's last victory occurred on April 26, 1944, with the destruction of 4 enemy aircraft in the Mediterranean. Their final mission took place on April 30, 1944, coinciding with significant events in Europe, including the fall of Berlin and the suicide of Adolf Hitler. The war in Europe officially concluded with the signing of the German surrender on May 7, 1945. However, conflict continued in the Far East. Chapter 8. Return to Homeland. The Tuskegee Airmen's experience during World War II marked a significant turning point in the fight for civil rights for African Americans within the U.S. military and society. They challenged the prevailing separate but equal doctrine, emerging as one of the most esteemed fighting groups of the war. The 99th Fighter Squadron and the 332nd Fighter Group completed 1,578 missions, achieving remarkable success by destroying nearly 260 enemy aircraft and maintaining an impressive record of never losing a bomber during escort missions. Their performance was notably superior to that of other fighter units, earning them the respect of both American bomber crews and the German Luftwaffe. On May 8, as Europe celebrated Victory Day, the 332nd Fighter Group received various honors, culminating in a significant ceremony on June 8, during which Colonel Benjamin O. Davis Jr. was awarded the Silver Star and other commendations. In his farewell speech, Davis expressed pride in leading the group. He highlighted their contributions to the Army Air Forces and the African American community. The Tuskegee Airmen's achievements dispelled long-held stereotypes about the capabilities of African Americans, showcasing their skills as exceptional escort pilots. However, their success was supported by countless invisible heroes in various roles, from mechanics to medical professionals, whose contributions were vital to the group's legacy and the broader civil rights movement. Returning home was challenging for the Tuskegee pilots, as they left behind the unique environment of Ramitelli, where they were celebrated as liberators by the local Italian population, contrasting sharply with the racial tensions they faced in the segregated South. In Ramitelli, their identity as Americans transcended racial barriers, fostering a sense of camaraderie and respect that was often absent in their home state of Alabama. Marco Altobello's report in Red Tails. De Tuskegee Ramitelli's highlights Captain Roscoe Brown's testimony about the living conditions of the Tuskegee Airmen in Ramitelli, where they resided in tents within an agricultural community. The local population, primarily farmers and children, exhibited no prejudice towards the airmen, viewing them simply as Americans. Tim Gray, president of the World War II Foundation, emphasized that the Italians were indifferent to skin color, fostering a strong sense of community and camaraderie between the residents of Campo Marino and the Tuskegee Airmen. The friendly relationship is further illustrated by the ongoing narrative surrounding the Red Tails, which is celebrated by the Molise municipality. A significant event took place on July 16, 2023, when a monument honoring the Tuskegee Airmen was unveiled in Campo Marino. This black and gold plaque commemorates the airmen's presence and contributions during their time in Ramitelli, reflecting the local pride in this chapter of military history. The recognition of the Tuskegee Airmen serves not only to honor their achievements against Nazi fascism but also to confront the historical discrimination faced by African Americans. The celebration of their legacy nearly a century later highlights the importance of remembering and acknowledging their significant contributions to both American and Italian military aviation history. The text highlights the historical significance of Ramitelli Airport and its role in the African American civil rights struggle, particularly through the experiences of the 332nd Fighter Group during World War II. The site, now largely agricultural, is being preserved by the Campo Marino municipality as a regional heritage site. Ramitelli served as a crucial base for Allied bombers, facilitating integration among airmen, notably during a significant event on December 29, 1944, when B-24 crews celebrated the New Year together without any racist incidents. Following the war, the dismantling of the Ramitelli airfield began on May 4, 1945. By June, the 99th Fighter Squadron returned to the U.S. to join the 477th Composite Group. The pilots of the 332nd Fighter Group faced the daunting reality of returning to a segregated society, grappling with feelings of inferiority despite their sacrifices and contributions to the war effort. Their reflections raised questions about the value of their service in the fight for civil rights. Upon their return to the U.S. on October 16, 1945, the pilots were met with a stark reminder of segregation, as illustrated by Airman Roscoe Brown's experience in New York Harbor, where the treatment of white and black troops starkly contrasted. This moment encapsulated the ongoing struggle for equality and recognition faced by African American servicemen after their heroic efforts in the war. The text highlights the stark contrast between the military integration of African American pilots during World War II and the persistent segregation they faced in American society upon their return. While the contributions of Tuskegee Airmen were recognized within the military, the reality of discrimination awaited them at home, where the racial question remained unresolved. The challenge for these veterans was not just fighting the Nazis but reintegrating into civilian life, particularly in the workforce, where many faced rejection from airlines despite their skills and experience. The expectations of the African American community for social progress following their military service were largely unmet. The belief that their sacrifices would lead to an end to Jim Crow laws and improved civil rights was quickly disillusioned. The frustration was compounded by the experience of integration within the military, which contrasted sharply with the ongoing humiliation of segregation in society. Civil rights organizations, such as the NAACP, had fought for the inclusion of African Americans in the military, hoping that their service would catalyze social change. Throughout the war, the struggle to support the Tuskegee pilots and highlight the contradictions of fighting for democracy while enduring discrimination continued. The black press, particularly the Pittsburgh Courier, played a crucial role in advocating for civil rights through the Double V campaign, which sought victory against both fascism abroad and racial injustice at home. This campaign symbolized hope and the aspiration for full citizenship for African Americans, linking the V for Victory gesture to a deeper meaning of identity and struggle within the community. The campaign was sparked by a letter from James G. Thompson published in the Courier on January 30, 1942, where he expressed his frustrations about the treatment of African Americans and questioned the value of sacrificing for a country that did not fully recognize their citizenship. His poignant questions highlighted the struggle for equality and the desire for full citizenship rights, resonating deeply within the black community. The letter catalyzed the Double V campaign, which became a powerful movement symbolizing the fight for victory abroad and at home. The Courier actively supported this initiative by publishing various articles, testimonials, and creative expressions, which garnered significant engagement from the Black community. Events such as dances, parades, and beauty pageants celebrated the Double V theme, establishing it as a cultural hallmark. Despite its initial momentum, the Double V campaign waned by 1943, and its goals remained largely unfulfilled after the war. However, the campaign played a crucial role in raising awareness and laying the groundwork for the civil rights activism that would emerge in the 1960s. By September 1945, the Double V insignia was phased out, replaced by a single V in 1946, symbolizing the ongoing struggle for civil rights and the realization that victory at home had yet to be achieved. Chapter 9. Conclusion. The desegregation process in America began with the military due to the unique role of the Supreme Court in interpreting the Constitution. Unlike European constitutional courts, the U.S. Supreme Court serves both as a constitutional judge and the highest court in the ordinary justice system, making its interpretations dynamic rather than static. The rigidity of the American Constitution means that significant changes in its application often arise from Supreme Court jurisprudence, which has historically shaped the nature of U.S. federalism. During the Civil War and in cases like Dred Scott, the court favored states' rights over federal authority. Before the landmark Brown v. Board of Education decision in 1954, the court upheld segregation under the Plessy v. Ferguson ruling, which deemed separate but equal services acceptable. However, the court's stance shifted after 1954, leading to the passage of the Civil Rights Act and a broader desegregation movement across American public life. The relationship between the Supreme Court and the presidency is complex, as the president appoints justices to the court. Still, Senate approval is required, reflecting the checks and balances inherent in the U.S. system. This dynamic was evident during Truman's presidency, when the Republican Party gained control of Congress, yet Truman still exercised his constitutional power as Commander-in-Chief to issue Executive Order 9981, which initiated the desegregation of the military. While racial divides persist in America, military conscription has historically provided a platform for African Americans to demonstrate their value and challenge long-standing racial prejudices, marking a significant step in the ongoing struggle for equality.